Imagine the silence of the ocean, where every sound could cost an entire submarine its future. In the shadow of the waves, a hunt of unseen rivals unfolds, and at the periscope stands the man they called Lucky Fluckey. He chooses a path others would never dare to take. At night on the surface, almost within reach of enemy searchlights, he launches attack maneuvers as if no time remains. His boat enters harbors where the depth barely covers the hull and escapes with results still discussed today. Later, he will send 8 volunteers to a place none of his comrades had ever stepped before, onto enemy soil, to carry out a silent mission that would shake rails and rattle enemy headquarters. What risk did he take? What secret helped him escape the hunters? Which decisions haunted him, and which turned him into a legend? Watch until the end. The boldest episodes are still ahead, and in them it becomes clear why this commander entered history forever. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Eugene Bennett Fluckey was born in October 1908 in Washington, District of Columbia, into a family that valued discipline and service. His father worked as a government clerk and passed on to his son a sense of duty and precision that would later become essential in the tight world of submarines. Maps covered the walls of their home, and conversations often turned to distant seas and naval adventures. Young Eugene grew up imagining the mystery of vessels that could vanish beneath the surface and reappear far away like ghosts. As a boy and later a teenager, he displayed qualities that would shape his future. Teachers remembered his calmness under stress and his unusual balance of careful planning with sudden daring decisions. He was not reckless, but had a natural ability to take calculated risks, an instinct that set him apart from his peers. The path to the Naval Academy did not come easily. Fluckey worked tirelessly to secure his appointment, knowing it was his only chance to reach the sea. When the acceptance to Annapolis finally arrived, he understood that his life would carry him far beyond the familiar streets of his hometown. At the academy, Eugene was not the brightest cadet, but among the most determined. Classmates recalled his steady focus and relentless preparation. The strict academic demands and military discipline shaped his character, teaching him to lead by example and to decide under pressure. Instructors noticed his ability to inspire confidence, a trait that later helped him command crews in the most dangerous conditions. Upon graduation in 1931, Ensign Fluckey faced the choice of career path. The surface fleet promised prestige, naval aviation offered excitement, yet he felt drawn to the silent world beneath the sea. Submarines were still viewed with suspicion by traditionalists who saw them as lacking the honor of ship-to-ship combat. To Fluckey, however, they represented the purest form of tactical thinking and teamwork. His early years in the submarine service were spent learning every system and every procedure, absorbing knowledge of how disasters could strike hundreds of feet below the surface. These were not glamorous assignments, but they built the foundation for his later innovations. During the quiet 30s, he studied, questioned traditions, and asked whether each step could be done in a better way. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, transformed the United States Navy overnight. Suddenly, the theoretical discussions of submarine warfare became matters of life and death. The Pacific Ocean, once a peaceful expanse connecting America to distant allies, became a battlefield where American submarines would need to strike back at an enemy that had caught them completely off guard. For Eugene Fluckey, now a seasoned submarine officer with a decade of experience, the war represented both opportunity and tremendous responsibility. The submarine force would be asked to carry out missions that seemed almost impossible. Penetrate heavily defended waters, strike at the heart of Japanese shipping, and survive long enough to return home with intelligence about enemy movements and capabilities. The early months of the war were sobering for the submarine service. Many boats went out on patrol and simply disappeared, their fate unknown until after the war, when Japanese records revealed the locations of their final battles. The enemy had prepared well for submarine warfare, deploying sophisticated sonar systems and depth charges that could crush a submarine hull like an eggshell. Fluckey found himself assigned to various submarines as the Navy struggled to replace experienced officers lost in the early fighting. These assignments gave him exposure to different command styles and tactical approaches, knowledge he absorbed like a sponge. He observed which tactics worked and which got men killed, filing away lessons that would serve him well when his own moment of command arrived. The submarine war in the Pacific differed fundamentally from the Battle of the Atlantic that captured most newspaper headlines. American submarines operated thousands of miles from their home bases, often spending weeks at sea without any contact with friendly forces. The psychological pressure on crews was immense, knowing that help was impossibly far away if anything went wrong. During his service as executive officer aboard various submarines, Fluckey developed a reputation as an officer who combined aggressive tactics with careful preparation. His fellow officers noticed his ability to remain calm during crisis situations, often providing the steady voice that helped commanders make crucial decisions under pressure. The Navy was learning hard lessons about submarine warfare, and many of those lessons came at a terrible cost. Early American torpedoes were plagued with defects that caused them to run too deep, fail to explode on impact, or detonate prematurely. Submarines would execute perfect attacks only to watch their torpedoes pass harmlessly beneath enemy ships or bounce off their hulls without exploding. These technical problems created a crisis of confidence within the submarine force. Crews began to question their weapons and their tactics, wondering if they were risking their lives for attacks that could never succeed. It was in this environment of doubt and frustration that Fluckey began to formulate his own ideas about how submarines could be more effective. In April of 1944, Lieutenant Commander Eugene Fluckey received the assignment that would define the rest of his career and his place in naval history. He was given command of USS Barb, a Gato-class submarine that had already completed several war patrols under previous commanders. The boat had a solid reputation, but nothing that suggested the remarkable career that lay ahead. Taking command of USS Barb represented more than just a career milestone for Eugene Fluckey. It marked the beginning of a partnership between man and machine that would revolutionize submarine warfare in the Pacific. The Barb was a Gato-class boat, 312 feet of steel and machinery designed to hunt enemy shipping in the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean. Fluckey's first task was to assess his crew and understand the submarine's capabilities and limitations. He spent weeks studying every system, every gauge, every mechanical component that might mean the difference between success and disaster during combat operations. But more importantly, he focused on the men who would serve under him, recognizing that crew morale and confidence would be just as important as torpedo accuracy. The crew of USS Barb had served under previous commanders who followed conventional submarine tactics: approach submerged, fire torpedoes from a safe distance, then dive deep to avoid retaliation. These methods had proven effective, but limited in their impact. Fluckey believed that submarines could accomplish much more if their commanders were willing to accept greater risks for greater rewards. His leadership style differed markedly from many of his contemporaries. Rather than maintaining the traditional distance between officers and enlisted men, Fluckey made it his practice to know every member of his crew personally. He understood that in the cramped confines of a submarine, trust and mutual respect were not luxuries, but necessities for survival. The first war patrol under Fluckey's command began in August 1944, and from the beginning, his crew sensed that they were serving under a different kind of commander. Where previous captains had approached targets with caution, Fluckey demonstrated a willingness to press attacks even when the tactical situation seemed unfavorable. His tactical innovations began to emerge during these early patrols. Instead of firing torpedoes from maximum range to minimize risk, Fluckey brought USS Barb closer to enemy vessels, ensuring higher hit percentages, but also exposing his submarine to greater danger. This approach required split-second timing and nerves of steel, qualities that Fluckey possessed in abundance. The crew initially approached their new commander's aggressive tactics with some apprehension. They had lost friends on other submarines, and they knew that boldness could easily cross the line into recklessness. But as successful attacks began to accumulate, confidence in their captain's judgment grew correspondingly. Fluckey's success came from more than just aggressive tactics. He possessed an intuitive understanding of enemy behavior patterns and shipping routes that allowed him to position USS Barb where targets would be most vulnerable. His analytical mind could process multiple variables simultaneously, calculating distances, speeds, and angles while under the pressure of combat. The relationship between Fluckey and his crew developed into something approaching mutual devotion. The men recognized that their captain was asking them to take extraordinary risks, but they also saw that he was asking nothing of them that he wasn't willing to risk himself. When depth charges exploded around their submarine, Fluckey remained calm and focused, his steady demeanor helping to keep the crew functional during the most terrifying moments. By the end of his first patrol as commanding officer, USS Barb had sunk several Japanese merchant vessels and established a reputation within the submarine force as an unusually effective hunter. More importantly, Fluckey had proven to himself and his crew that aggressive tactics could succeed if they were combined with careful planning and precise execution. The success of these early patrols brought USS Barb to the attention of higher command levels, and Fluckey found himself with increasing freedom to conduct operations according to his own tactical judgment. This autonomy would prove crucial as he began to develop even more innovative approaches to submarine warfare. The transformation of USS Barb into the most feared submarine in the Pacific did not happen overnight, but by her 8th war patrol, patterns were emerging that would define Eugene Fluckey's approach to submarine warfare. Where other commanders saw limitations, Fluckey saw opportunities. Where conventional wisdom counseled caution, he calculated that boldness might yield extraordinary results. During 5 war patrols, Commander Fluckey's initiative and aggressiveness cost the enemy at least 16 ships, but raw numbers alone failed to capture the full scope of his innovations. Fluckey was pioneering tactics that challenged every assumption about how submarines should operate in enemy-controlled waters. His most dramatic departure from conventional submarine warfare involved surface attacks conducted at night. While other submarines avoided surface operations in enemy waters, Fluckey recognized that USS Barb could use darkness and weather conditions to approach targets undetected, then strike with devastating effectiveness before disappearing again into the night. These surface attacks required extraordinary coordination between crew members and placed enormous demands on lookouts who had to spot enemy vessels before being spotted themselves. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. A moment's inattention could result in the submarine being caught on the surface by enemy destroyers with no time to dive to safety. The crew of USS Barb adapted to their commander's aggressive approach with a mixture of pride and apprehension. They understood that they were participating in something unprecedented in submarine warfare, but they also knew that their survival depended on flawless execution of increasingly complex tactical maneuvers. Fluckey's tactical innovations extended beyond simple aggression. He developed new approaches to torpedo attacks that maximized damage while minimizing the submarine's exposure to counterattack. His understanding of torpedo ballistics and enemy ship construction allowed him to place weapons with surgical precision, often achieving results that seemed impossible to outside observers. One of his most successful innovations involved what became known as the down-the-throat shot, where USS Barb would fire torpedoes directly at approaching enemy warships rather than trying to achieve a traditional side-on angle of attack. This tactic required nerves of steel and split-second timing, but it allowed the submarine to engage threats that conventional tactics would have required them to avoid. The psychological impact of USS Barb's operations began to extend far beyond the immediate tactical results. Japanese shipping companies started avoiding routes where the submarine was known to operate, and enemy naval forces had to dedicate increasing resources to anti-submarine patrols that might otherwise have been used for offensive operations. Fluckey's success attracted attention from submarine force headquarters, but it also created expectations that weighed heavily on his mind. Each successful patrol raised the bar for the next one, and he knew that his crew was looking to him to continue delivering results that justified the risks they were taking. The 11th War Patrol of USS Barb, conducted from December 19, 1944 to February 15, 1945, would become the stuff of legend. Operating in the treacherous waters off the Chinese coast, Fluckey demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty during attacks that pushed submarine warfare to its absolute limits. The patrol began with intelligence reports indicating heavy Japanese shipping activity in the Formosa Straits and East China Sea. These waters were heavily defended by enemy patrol vessels and aircraft, but they also offered the potential for inflicting significant damage on Japanese supply lines that were becoming increasingly crucial as the war turned against them. Fluckey's decision to penetrate Namquan Harbor represented the culmination of his aggressive tactical philosophy. Maneuvering in dangerously shallow waters, Barb launched her torpedoes against a convoy of approximately 30 enemy ships at anchor, creating havoc that would be remembered as one of the most audacious submarine attacks of the entire war. The harbor attack required USS Barb to operate in waters so shallow that the submarine's keel nearly scraped the bottom, with enemy shore batteries close enough that their muzzle flashes were visible to crew members on the bridge. Escape routes were limited, and the margin for error was measured in feet rather than miles. Yet the results justified the enormous risks. Multiple Japanese vessels were sunk or damaged, and the psychological impact on enemy forces was enormous. The attack demonstrated that no anchorage, no matter how well protected, was safe from American submarines willing to press their attacks with sufficient determination and skill. The summer of 1945 found USS Barb preparing for what would become the most extraordinary mission in the history of American submarine warfare. On July 23, 1945, the Barb embarked on a sabotage mission that would forever change how naval forces thought about the role submarines could play in warfare. The strategic situation had changed dramatically by this point in the war. Allied forces were tightening their grip around Japan itself, but the enemy homeland remained largely untouched by direct military action. Bombing campaigns had struck major cities and industrial centers, but the psychological impact of foreign soldiers actually setting foot on Japanese soil would be immeasurable. Fluckey had been studying charts of the Japanese coastline for weeks, looking for opportunities to strike targets that could not be reached by conventional submarine attacks. His attention focused on the railroad networks that connected Japanese industrial centers with ports and military installations, vital arteries that kept the enemy war machine functioning despite increasing Allied pressure. Sakhalin Island, then part of Japan's Karafuto Prefecture, presented an intriguing target. The island's southern tip contained railroad lines that carried supplies and troops between the mainland and various military installations. More importantly, these railroad lines ran close enough to the coastline that they might be reached by a carefully planned amphibious operation. The plan that emerged from Fluckey's analysis was audacious beyond anything previously attempted by American submarine forces. With the submarine standing 950 yards offshore, 8 volunteers, aboard a pair of rubber boats, paddled onto Japanese soil under cover of darkness to conduct the first and only amphibious landing on the Japanese home islands by American military forces during World War II. Selecting the volunteers for this mission required careful consideration of both technical skills and psychological factors. The men chosen needed to be expert swimmers capable of handling small boats in potentially rough seas. They also needed steady nerves and the ability to work efficiently under extreme pressure, knowing that their submarine could not wait for them if something went wrong. The volunteers understood that they were participating in history, but they also knew that capture would likely mean torture and execution as saboteurs rather than treatment as prisoners of war. Japanese military doctrine provided little protection for enemy soldiers caught conducting covert operations on home territory. Preparations for the mission involved extensive rehearsals conducted in secret anchorages far from enemy observation. The crew practiced launching and recovering rubber boats at night, timing their operations to minimize the submarine's vulnerability while maximizing the landing party's chances of success. Fluckey selected 8 commandos from his crew to paddle ashore in rubber boats and place a 55-pound bomb under railroad ties on what intelligence sources indicated was an active railway line carrying both military supplies and troop trains between strategic locations. The night chosen for the operation was moonless and cloudy, providing maximum concealment for the small boats as they made their way toward the Japanese shoreline. Weather conditions were challenging, but not impossible, with moderate seas that would test the crew's seamanship without making the mission suicidal. USS Barb took position as close to the shore as Fluckey dared, balancing the need to minimize the distance the landing party would have to travel against the risk of running aground or being spotted by coastal observers. The submarine's crew maintained absolute silence during the approach, knowing that sound carried far across water on calm nights. The landing itself proceeded according to plan, with the volunteers reaching shore undetected and making their way inland to locate the railroad tracks. Working quickly in the darkness, they placed their explosive charges and set timers that would allow them to escape before detonation revealed their presence to Japanese forces. As the men were rowing back to the Barb in darkness, the pressure-sensitive charge blew up a 16-car troop train, destroying a 16-car train and creating a spectacular explosion that could be seen from miles away. The psychological impact of this attack went far beyond its tactical significance, demonstrating that American forces could strike anywhere they chose, even on Japanese home territory. The successful completion of this mission represented the culmination of Fluckey's tactical innovations and his willingness to attempt operations that other commanders would have considered impossible. This was the sole landing by U.S. military forces on the Japanese home islands during the entire war, making it a unique achievement in military history. The extraordinary achievements of USS Barb under Eugene Fluckey's command came at a cost that extended far beyond the mechanical wear and tear on the submarine itself. Each successful patrol brought the crew closer to the statistical reality that faced all submarine personnel. The longer they continued operating in enemy waters, the greater the probability that their luck would eventually run out. The submarine force suffered casualty rates that exceeded those of any other branch of the American military during World War II. Entire crews disappeared without trace when their submarines encountered enemy anti-submarine patrols or struck mines in heavily defended waters. The knowledge of these losses weighed heavily on every man who descended beneath the waves, knowing that each patrol might be his last. For Fluckey, the burden of command included responsibility for the lives of 80 men who depended on his tactical judgment for their survival. Every decision to press an attack or penetrate dangerous waters carried with it the knowledge that miscalculation could result in the loss of his entire crew, men whose trust he had earned through months of successful operations. The psychological strain of repeated combat patrols manifested in different ways among different crew members. Some men developed an almost fatalistic acceptance of their situation, focusing on their duties while trying not to think too much about the odds against their survival. Others became increasingly nervous and jumpy, their nerves frayed by the constant tension of operating in enemy territory. Fluckey's leadership style helped maintain crew morale during the most difficult periods, but even his steady confidence could not completely eliminate the fear that lurked in every man's mind. The close quarters of submarine life meant that emotional states spread quickly through the crew, making it essential for officers to maintain their composure even when facing seemingly impossible situations. Sleep became a precious commodity for men who knew that enemy depth charges could begin falling at any moment. The submarine's ventilation systems could not completely eliminate the odors of 80 men living in close quarters for weeks at a time, and the constant humidity created an environment where minor irritations could easily escalate into major confrontations. The physical demands of submarine service took their toll as well. Men lost weight during long patrols, and the lack of sunlight led to various health problems that could not be properly addressed until the submarine returned to port. Minor injuries that would be easily treated on land became serious concerns when medical facilities were limited to what could be carried aboard the submarine. Despite these challenges, the crew of USS Barb developed an extraordinary sense of camaraderie and mutual dependence that sustained them through the most difficult moments. They understood that their survival depended not just on their individual skills, but on their ability to function as a coordinated team under extreme pressure. Fluckey's aggressive tactics increased both the potential rewards and the potential risks of each patrol. His willingness to penetrate heavily defended waters and attack targets that other submarines might avoid created opportunities for inflicting significant damage on the enemy. But it also placed his crew in situations where escape might be impossible if anything went wrong. The success of these aggressive tactics vindicated Fluckey's tactical philosophy, but they also created expectations that weighed heavily on future operations. Each successful patrol raised the bar for the next one, and the crew knew that their reputation for achieving the impossible meant they would continue to be assigned the most dangerous and challenging missions. The war's progression toward its eventual conclusion brought mixed emotions among submarine crews. The prospect of peace meant survival for those who had endured multiple combat patrols, but it also meant that the close bonds forged in combat would inevitably be broken as men returned to civilian life or were assigned to different duties. For Fluckey personally, the weight of command during wartime created internal conflicts that would remain with him long after the fighting ended. The aggressive tactics that made him a legendary submarine commander required him to make split-second decisions that could cost lives, decisions that seemed clear-cut in the heat of combat, but would be analyzed and reanalyzed during quieter moments. The conclusion of World War II brought immediate relief to submarine crews, who had survived months or years of combat operations in the Pacific. But it also initiated a process of recognition and evaluation that would determine how history would remember their contributions to victory over Japan. For Eugene Fluckey and the crew of USS Barb, the end of hostilities marked the beginning of a different kind of scrutiny, as naval authorities attempted to document and understand the tactical innovations that had made their submarine one of the most successful in the American fleet. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, Fluckey received the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, recognizing achievements that went far beyond simple courage under fire. His tactical innovations had influenced submarine warfare throughout the Pacific, and his willingness to attempt operations that others considered impossible had opened new possibilities for naval forces. The Medal of Honor citation specifically recognized his performance as commanding officer of the USS Barb during her 11th war patrol along the east coast of China from December 19, 1944 to February 15, 1945. But the award also represented acknowledgement of his broader contributions to submarine warfare tactics and strategy. Barb received the Presidential Unit Citation for the 8th through 11th patrols and the Navy Unit Commendation for the 12th patrol, making the submarine one of the most decorated vessels in the American fleet. These unit awards recognized the collective achievements of the crew while acknowledging the leadership that made those achievements possible. The recognition extended beyond formal military decorations. Fluckey was awarded 4 Navy Crosses in addition to his Medal of Honor, a record of awards unmatched by any living American at the time. This unprecedented collection of decorations reflected both the extraordinary nature of his achievements and the military's recognition that his contributions had fundamentally changed submarine warfare. The statistical record of USS Barb under Fluckey's command provided quantitative evidence of the submarine's success. The vessel had sunk or damaged dozens of enemy ships, destroyed shore installations, and conducted the only amphibious landing on Japanese home territory by American forces during the entire war. These achievements represented tactical success, but they also demonstrated the potential for submarines to conduct operations far beyond their traditional roles. The crew members who had served under Fluckey during his most successful patrols found themselves sharing in the recognition that came with being part of a legendary submarine. Many would carry the pride of their service aboard USS Barb for the rest of their lives, understanding that they had participated in something truly extraordinary. The transition from wartime to peacetime operations created new challenges for Fluckey as he attempted to apply his tactical innovations to training programs that would prepare future submarine crews for different kinds of missions. The lessons learned during combat patrols needed to be preserved and transmitted to officers who might never face similar challenges. Naval historians began studying Fluckey's tactics almost immediately after the war's conclusion, recognizing that his approach to submarine warfare contained insights that could influence naval strategy for decades to come. His willingness to challenge conventional wisdom and his ability to achieve success through calculated risk-taking provided models for future commanders. The public recognition that accompanied military decorations brought Fluckey to national attention as a war hero, but it also created expectations about his future career that would influence decisions about assignments and responsibilities. The Navy understood that his reputation and expertise made him valuable for various roles beyond operational command. The transition from the intense focus of wartime submarine operations to the different demands of peacetime naval service presented Eugene Fluckey with challenges that differed significantly from those he had mastered during his legendary command of USS Barb. The skills that made him an extraordinary combat commander needed to be adapted to new roles and responsibilities in a Navy adjusting to post-war realities. In August 1945, Fluckey was ordered to Naval Submarine Base New London, where he would contribute his expertise to training programs designed to preserve and transmit the lessons learned during the Pacific Campaign. The submarine force recognized that tactical innovations developed during wartime could be lost if they were not properly documented and incorporated into standard training procedures. His assignment to New London provided opportunities to work with younger officers who would lead the submarine force during the Cold War era. These men had not experienced the intense combat conditions of World War II, and they needed to understand both the technical and psychological aspects of submarine warfare that Fluckey had mastered through direct experience. The teaching role allowed Fluckey to analyze and articulate the tactical principles that had guided his most successful operations. This process of reflection and explanation helped codify approaches to submarine warfare that had been largely intuitive during combat, creating formal doctrine that could be taught to future generations of submarine officers. Fluckey remained in the submarine service, commanding both the USS Dogfish and the USS Halfbeak, assignments that provided opportunities to test peacetime applications of wartime tactical innovations. These commands required different skills than combat operations, focusing more on training and readiness than on immediate tactical success. The Cold War created new challenges for submarine forces as potential adversaries developed different capabilities and employed different tactics than those encountered during World War II. Fluckey's expertise needed to be adapted to address threats that might not resemble the enemy forces he had faced in the Pacific. His analytical approach to tactical problems proved valuable as the Navy developed strategies for dealing with potential submarine warfare scenarios involving the Soviet Union. The aggressive tactics that had proven successful against Japanese forces might need modification when applied to opponents with more sophisticated anti-submarine capabilities. He would also serve at COMSUBPAC, where his responsibilities included strategic planning and coordination of submarine operations throughout the Pacific region. This staff assignment provided broader perspective on how tactical innovations could be integrated into larger strategic frameworks. The bureaucratic aspects of peacetime military service required skills that differed from those needed for combat command. But Fluckey's attention to detail and analytical approach served him well in these new roles. His reputation for achieving results under pressure translated into effectiveness in managing complex administrative responsibilities. His influence on submarine doctrine extended beyond formal training programs through informal mentoring relationships with younger officers who sought his guidance on tactical and leadership issues. These personal relationships helped ensure that the lessons of wartime experience would continue to influence submarine operations long after the specific circumstances of World War II had become historical memories. The technological evolution of submarine warfare during the post-war period required officers like Fluckey to adapt their thinking to new capabilities and limitations. Nuclear propulsion and advanced sonar systems changed the fundamental parameters of submarine operations, but many of the tactical principles he had developed remained relevant. Finally retiring as a rear admiral in 1972 after 37 years of service, Fluckey concluded a naval career that had spanned both the climactic battles of World War II and the strategic challenges of the Cold War era. His influence on submarine warfare would continue long after his retirement through the officers he had trained and the tactical doctrine he had helped develop. The extraordinary nature of Eugene Fluckey's achievements inevitably attracted attention that went beyond factual historical documentation, creating a mixture of verified accomplishments and legendary embellishments that sometimes obscured the remarkable reality of what USS Barb had actually achieved during World War II. Naval folklore has a tendency to magnify the exploits of successful commanders, and Fluckey's aggressive tactics and unprecedented operations provided fertile ground for stories that grew in the telling. Some accounts credited him with sinking more ships than official records documented, while others described tactical maneuvers that exceeded even his considerable actual achievements. The amphibious landing on Sakhalin Island became particularly subject to embellishment as storytellers added dramatic details that enhanced the narrative impact while straying from documented facts. Some versions described fierce firefights with Japanese defenders, while others claimed that the landing party had penetrated much deeper into enemy territory than actually occurred. These embellishments often arose from well-meaning attempts to celebrate Fluckey's achievements, but they created challenges for historians attempting to separate verified facts from enthusiastic speculation. The real story of USS Barb was remarkable enough without fictional enhancements, but popular culture seemed to demand even more dramatic narratives. Comparisons with other submarine commanders sometimes led to exaggerated claims about relative success rates and tactical innovations. While Fluckey was undoubtedly one of the most successful submarine commanders of World War II, debates about whether he was the absolute best often involved subjective judgments that could not be definitively resolved through statistical analysis. The crew members who served under Fluckey during his most successful patrols became sources of both accurate historical information and occasionally embellished anecdotes that reflected their pride in their service aboard USS Barb. Their memories of specific incidents sometimes differed in details while agreeing on the general outline of events. Japanese sources provided different perspectives on USS Barb's operations, sometimes describing the submarine's effectiveness in terms that seemed to confirm the most dramatic American accounts. Enemy records documented the significant impact of Fluckey's operations on Japanese shipping and morale, but they also contained their own inaccuracies and misunderstandings. The question of how Fluckey's tactics would have performed against different opponents or under different circumstances became a subject of speculation among naval theorists who debated whether his aggressive approach represented universally applicable principles or responses to specific wartime conditions. Some critics argued that Fluckey's success resulted as much from favorable circumstances as from tactical brilliance, pointing to factors such as declining Japanese anti-submarine capabilities and the general deterioration of enemy defenses as the war progressed. These arguments failed to diminish his achievements, but provided alternative interpretations of the factors that contributed to his success. The psychological aspects of Fluckey's leadership style attracted analysis from military historians attempting to understand how he maintained crew morale and effectiveness during extremely dangerous operations. Some theories attributed his success to charismatic leadership, while others emphasized his analytical approach to tactical problems. Popular culture's treatment of submarine warfare during World War II often drew inspiration from Fluckey's exploits, but fictional portrayals sometimes combined elements from different commanders or different time periods in ways that created misleading impressions about actual historical events. The distinction between tactical innovation and reckless risk-taking became a subject of debate among naval officers who studied Fluckey's methods for lessons that could be applied to future operations. Some argued that his willingness to accept extreme risks was justified only by the extraordinary circumstances of World War II, while others maintained that calculated aggression represented a timeless principle of effective military leadership. The impact of Eugene Fluckey's tactical innovations extended far beyond the immediate results achieved by USS Barb during World War II, influencing submarine warfare doctrine and training programs for decades after the conclusion of hostilities in the Pacific. His aggressive approach to submarine operations challenged conventional wisdom and demonstrated possibilities that other commanders had not previously considered. Modern submarine warfare continues to reflect principles that Fluckey pioneered during his command of USS Barb, particularly his emphasis on aggressive tactics combined with meticulous planning and preparation. Contemporary submarine crews study his operations as examples of how bold leadership can achieve results that seem impossible when viewed from conventional perspectives. The Naval Submarine School at New London incorporated Fluckey's tactical innovations into training curricula that prepared generations of submarine officers for command responsibilities. His willingness to challenge established procedures became a model for encouraging tactical thinking that went beyond rigid adherence to standard operating procedures. Military academies around the world continue to study Fluckey's operations as case studies in leadership under extreme pressure and the importance of maintaining crew morale during dangerous missions. His ability to inspire confidence in his men while asking them to accept extraordinary risks provides lessons that apply to military leadership in various contexts. The submarine force's culture of innovation and calculated risk-taking owes much to the example set by commanders like Fluckey, who demonstrated that conventional limitations could be transcended through creative thinking and determined execution. His legacy encouraged future generations of submarine officers to question assumptions and seek new solutions to tactical challenges. The technological evolution of submarine warfare during the Cold War and beyond required adaptation of Fluckey's tactical principles to new capabilities and threats, but the fundamental approach he pioneered remained relevant. Nuclear-powered submarines with advanced sonar and weapon systems still benefited from commanders who understood when to take calculated risks for strategic advantage. Popular culture's portrayal of submarine warfare during World War II drew heavily on stories of commanders like Fluckey, creating public awareness of the submarine force's contributions to victory in the Pacific. Movies, books, and television programs often featured characters inspired by real submarine commanders, helping preserve public memory of their achievements. The Medal of Honor recipients from the submarine force during World War II became symbols of courage and innovation that inspired later generations of naval personnel. Fluckey's inclusion among this select group ensured that his achievements would be remembered and studied by future military historians and strategists. Naval museums and memorials preserve artifacts and documents related to USS Barb and other successful submarines, providing tangible connections to the wartime experiences that shaped modern submarine warfare doctrine. These exhibits help visitors understand the conditions under which men like Fluckey and their crews operated. International naval exchanges and professional development programs continue to reference Fluckey's operations as examples of effective submarine warfare tactics that transcend national boundaries and technological differences. His innovations influenced naval thinking beyond the United States Navy, contributing to global understanding of submarine capabilities and limitations. The strategic implications of Fluckey's operations extended beyond their immediate tactical results, demonstrating how small units operating with initiative and determination could achieve effects disproportionate to their size and resources. This lesson proved relevant to various military situations that arose during the Cold War and subsequent conflicts. Contemporary military leaders study Fluckey's decision-making processes as examples of how to balance risk and opportunity under extreme pressure, seeking to understand the mental frameworks that enabled him to achieve success where others might have failed. His analytical approach to tactical problems provides models for military planning and execution that remain relevant today. The extraordinary career of Eugene Fluckey and the legendary patrols of USS Barb left behind not only official reports, but also many overlooked stories that reveal the human face of submarine warfare. Beyond medals and records, the men who served under Fluckey carried private memories that shaped their lives long after the war ended. Chief Torpedoman Paul Saunders, one of the 8 who paddled ashore on the Japanese coast, later described the strange blend of fear and exhilaration as he rode through the black water. He knew that capture meant no mercy, yet he pressed forward with quiet resolve. His testimony highlights the mental discipline required for such an unprecedented mission. Even small roles mattered. The cook, working with limited supplies in cramped quarters, invented ways to keep morale alive through meals that felt almost like comfort from home. To outsiders, these details seem minor, but to the crew, they were lifelines in weeks of tension. Engineers faced constant battles with machinery under extreme conditions. They patched damage from depth charges, improvised repairs, and kept the submarine alive when systems were pushed to the edge. Their skill often made the difference between escape and disaster. The medical corpsman, working without a doctor and with only basic equipment, treated wounds and illness while the boat was still under fire. His devotion embodied the interdependence of every man aboard. Radio operators intercepted enemy signals, piecing together patterns that guided the Barb toward convoys or away from ambush. Navigation officers calculated perilous routes through minefields, where a mistake of a few yards could mean destruction. Lookouts on the surface carried perhaps the heaviest burden, spotting threats in darkness, knowing a single missed shape on the horizon could doom them all. Life under such strain bred rituals and superstitions. Some men carried lucky charms, others repeated routines before each patrol. These habits helped them hold back the gnawing fear. Maintenance crews toiled in suffocating heat, often fixing complex systems while submerged. Their unseen labor enabled Fluckey's boldest actions. The story of USS Barb also included connections beyond the submarine. Families at home lived through months of silence, clinging to brief letters or rumors while never knowing if their sons or husbands would return. After the war, reunions allowed veterans to share memories too raw to speak of earlier. Friendships born in the pressure of combat lasted lifetimes. Innovation grew from necessity. Officers and enlisted men together devised adjustments that designers had never imagined. Intelligence gathered by Barb's patrols shaped wider strategies in the Pacific, far beyond the sinkings listed in logs. Some veterans carried Fluckey's lessons into their own commands, spreading his influence through the submarine force for decades. Artifacts preserved by families, photographs, diaries, even small tools, keep alive the personal side of history. Museums and memorials display them to honor not only the daring commander, but also the collective effort of his crew. The geography of Barb's operations brought her to remote corners of the Pacific, exposing the men to unfamiliar cultures and landscapes. Sometimes local civilians, themselves suffering under occupation, quietly aided American sailors. These fleeting encounters created human links in a vast conflict. The timing of Barb's most daring missions often aligned with larger shifts in the Pacific War, magnifying their impact on Allied strategy even when the crew themselves could not see the full picture. The legacy of USS Barb endures in more than textbooks. It lives in stories passed among families, in the bonds of veterans who shared impossible risks, and in the enduring respect for Eugene Fluckey's leadership. Their service continues to echo through museums and naval schools, reminding each generation that history is made not only by commanders, but also by every hand that turned a valve, manned a lookout, or cooked a meal in the belly of a steel vessel beneath the waves.